What if I told you that we already have verified Bigfoot DNA, plus a whole lot of evidence that Sasquatch is much more than a simple undiscovered ape?
Standing there in Timber, Oregon, in a clear cut, and there it was, and it dissolved away just like on Star Trek.
Over the last year, I've talked to a lot of people about Bigfoot, but what came out of the interview that you're about to see honestly hit me in a way I wasn't expecting.
And I learned early on that our government will never admit to anything that they can't control.
Just the secrecy that surrounds our parks, to me, is it's beyond belief. Some people know some things that they don't want other people to know, and they control it. And there's that mentality, kind of the gatekeeper, this arrogance that you can't handle what's going on.
This time, I was sitting down with a former police detective, a guy with decades of experience catching liars, building airtight cases, and following the evidence wherever it leads. And I watched and listened to him calmly lay out what the data actually says about Sasquatch.
All of the maternal side were the same, and they showed it coming back 12 to 15,000 years to the Middle East. The fraternal side didn't exist in GenBank, the world receptacle for DNA.
David Paulides doesn't waste words. He doesn't ramble or pointlessly speculate. He just walks through the facts, the DNA work that's already been done, why certain samples were quietly pushed aside, why the best physical evidence always seems to vanish from public view, and the patterns he's seen across thousands of cases that almost no one knows about. Then he explains in simple terms what convinced him that Sasquatch isn't just a myth, and it certainly isn't just an undiscovered ape.
Out over to our left off this slight hillside, here come these tracks in a straight line, about a 5-foot stride, across the trail in front of us, stop 3 feet on the other side of the trail. I mean, there's the beginning, here's the end. How did he do that?
There's a point in this conversation where everything he's saying suddenly locks together, and you'll know it when you hear it. It isn't sensational or melodramatic for the sake of it. It just forces you to rethink what these beings are actually capable of. So for the next little while, if you can, set aside everything you've heard about Bigfoot, everything the skeptics keep repeating regardless of the facts, everything the unwashed masses on the internet love to argue about. Instead, listen to a professional investigator walk you through the evidence. My guess is you'll come away seeing Sasquatch completely differently.
I don't have my glasses on. Look at that.
So for starters, I wasn't a Bigfoot guy, wasn't interested in the topic. I was hired by some technology guys that had a sighting, and they were interested in someone collecting facts and telling them if it was fact or fiction. It turned out that in Hoopa, California, a Native American reservation, they had a police department, they had a hotel, they had internet, and it was 35 miles south of the Patterson-Gimlin location. And they had had a series of sightings consistent over the years. Seemed like a good place to start. And it was about 7 hours from my house. So for the next 2 years, I spent 50% of my life going there and interviewing Native Americans, locals who had encounters. So I looked for the best forensic sketch artist, and I was so lucky. I found Harvey Pratt, who's a Native American chief from Oklahoma, and he's also a Oklahoma Bureau of Investigation agent and the chief forensic artist for the state of Oklahoma. When he drew a sketch of somebody, it looked just exactly like the person when they were caught. At the end of that first day, we did 6 sketches, and we sat down and we just looked and stared at each other because it didn't match anything of what the academics were saying. What they were saying is that it was a gorilla, ape, and what Harvey drew and what the people said, oh, that's exactly what it looked like after every sketch. Kind of like a person.
So I did everything I could to just make a mental picture in my head so that I could remember it. He had a massive jaw, a flattish nose, very dark, deep-set eyes, that very heavy brow. And above that brow, it was just empty space where we would have a forehead. He had no hair on his face. It was pasty pale white. It was black hair growing out from the sides, straight back, and from the sides of those ridges. And that went down the back of his head and fanned out beautifully across his back. I knew that one more step and he would be out in the open and would have full view of it. And he took that last step, and it was as if he stepped behind an invisible curtain. He just wasn't there anymore.
What would you say to those folks who say, well, they can't be real because there's no physical evidence, there's no DNA, all of those things? What would your response be?
Those people haven't taken a deep dive on the topic, and they're reading too much mainstream media, and they're not getting to the true research behind the topic. If DNA was to be gotten, would people be withholding it because it doesn't fit their paradigm? So Wally Hersham was the primary benefactor that funded BFRO for years. His edict to them was to get DNA. So that was going on 10 years before I ever got involved. I got involved, and within the first year, there was an incident in Hoopa where we got some hair. Guaranteed it was a Bigfoot. And there was follicles on the hair. I looked around and I tried to find UC Davis, UC Berkeley. I called 7 or 8 of the biggest universities in the US that did research. None of them would touch Bigfoot hair. So when you get a hair and fiber experts in the United States have hair on every animal in the world. They go through and they match that hair to whatever animal that may, or human, it may belong to. Same with fibers. Carpet fibers, et cetera, are made by certain manufacturers, and they have those specimens. Say a fiber's found on a body, they know how to match that to the right carpet. Well, in this type of research, when you get a hair, you just don't send it to DNA testing. You want to make sure it's not a deer, a bear, et cetera. So it was first sent to a hair and fiber expert, and they said, that's nothing we've ever seen. Okay, giddy up. Now it goes to DNA testing. They couldn't identify it as anything belonging to any animal or human in the world. So Melba Ketchum went on, and I took her on Coast to Coast, and we made a request from anybody in North America to send their specimens, whatever they had, tissue, blood, saliva, and send them to her. We ended up getting 110 verifiable samples from Canada and the US.
Ketchum has been attempting to get DNA on what could very well be Sasquatch and has been very successful.
All of the samples came back the same. Hair samples only show the maternal side of DNA. Nuclear DNA shows the fraternal side, and we had nuclear DNA on some of these samples. All of the maternal side were the same, and they showed it coming back 12 to 15,000 years to the Middle East. The fraternal side didn't exist in GenBank, the world receptacle for DNA. At the time, they had 352 billion base pairs. They now have 34 trillion base pairs. Never been seen before, never been categorized, doesn't exist.
Another criticism that's commonly raised, which doesn't attack the procedure or findings of the study directly, but this lady behind it, at least partially behind it, Dr. Ketchum, people say, well, she's not a trained geneticist, she's not a trained scientist, she's a veterinarian, so how the heck does she come off like she knows what she's talking about, and why should we believe anything that she has been involved with? That's criticism number one. And criticism number two is that these findings were published in a journal that she herself founded, De Novo Journal. So obviously, impartiality, the critics say, isn't there. So how would you respond to those two common criticisms?
Read the book Truth Denied by Scott Carpenter. The documents are in there. I understand why those concerns would be rolled around, but again, it's believing some half-truth. So the first one, Dr. Ketchum had signed an agreement early on with the journal Nature. After the evidence came in, which they thought it never would, and they thought it would be an ape or a gorilla, once it comes in, they wouldn't publicize it. They poo-pooed it. They had no logical reason to, and they never gave her a reason why they wouldn't. They just stopped, and no other journal would touch it. But it's really a side issue, irrelevant from the evidence. Now, why Ketchum? Do you know that she has testified as a DNA expert in the Texas courts and put people on death row with her testimony? So when people say she's not an expert, well, define an expert for me. She's probably testified more time as an expert in court on DNA than anyone. When samples come up in Texas, she's the one that goes and testifies.
Well, as you say, if her word and expertise in this field is good enough to sentence people to death, it should be good enough to determine an unclassified species, you would think. But it's also worth noting that she's not the only PhD scientist involved in these findings. There were others. Do you want to share about that?
So I'm not going to go into the individual detail, but there were many PhDs, highly qualified, that worked on the white paper that was written about this. And you could read it, it's online. And do you really think that these people would all group together and put their livelihood and good, honest nature on the line for something they didn't truly believe?
The Bigfoot tracks on the wall,
Yes.
they have some meaning to you?
Well, I do believe that there is something out there that we haven't found yet. And I don't know what it is. But yes, I believe there is a species out there that is humanoid and is very kin to us and very smart.
Did the Rangers ever talk about it?
And I learned early on that our government will never admit to anything that they can't control. And if you think about disclosure on the UFO topic, I don't believe that they're ever going to tell us everything about the UFO topic. Disclosure is never going to happen. People need to rely on top quality private researchers that are out there because they probably know as much as the government knows. And I know people don't like to think that, but I believe that's true. The example being Skinwalker Ranch. I was very fortunate to have George Knapp, who I'd done dozens of coast-to-coast shows with, tell me that the main researcher under Robert Bigelow at Skinwalker Ranch wanted to talk to me in Las Vegas. I went down there and I met with Colin Kelleher. He's one of the smartest men I ever met in my life. And he was doing research, Bigfoot, UFOs, everything in between revolving around the ranch. Subsequent to the end time of when Bigelow owned that, he had the government come on site and do parallel research with them.
It was two investigators. They were both part of the NIDS team. This was about 2 a.m. They had been on the ridge, Skinwalker Ridge. Just as they were packing up their equipment, one of them saw this sort of dull light that was on the track on the ground. And it seemed to be getting bigger and it seemed to be getting brighter. They said, okay, well, you know, we've got to investigate this. One guy had night vision binoculars, and then the guy with the night vision binoculars started really freaking out because through the night vision binoculars, this guy was seeing something completely different from his partner who was standing beside him.
Now think about this. If the government knew everything that was going on, why did they spend $20 million to go to the ranch for 2 years? They don't. They really have no idea. And I think it becomes apparent when you see them spending that exorbitant amount of money to work with the private researchers that are on the property. And remember, at that property, they had portals opening, they had UFOs flying, they had animal mutilations. It was a plethora of paranormal events at one spot. And some people are going to say, well, that really didn't happen, this and that. Well, I know the people at the ranch, and those people would not waste their time on a theatrical event. And what you're seeing on TV now with the Skinwalker Ranch episode, what Travis Taylor and his crew are doing, you're watching real science live. It's probably never been done on TV. And I think people are uncomfortable because what they're starting to explain may be occurring. And you've heard Travis Taylor saying, hey, are we seeing a portal opening right in front of us? Because nobody really knows.
Okay, this is the part of the conversation where I have to stop things for a second. Because what Dave just shared about portals being real and the government forking out millions to study paranormal stuff at Skinwalker Ranch, that's the doorway. That's the hinge that everything swings on. People think that government suppression of Sasquatch and other fringe topics is just the government not wanting to shut down logging or mining, or not wanting to admit that there's something in the woods they can't explain. But the deeper you go, and the deeper I've gone over the last year, the more you realize that this is about a whole lot more than some undiscovered primate. This is about phenomena the government can't contain, can't control, and in some cases, can't even understand. I'm working on something right now, a future episode here on Cabin in the Woods, that delves into the full detail of government suppression of Sasquatch. All the dirty little secrets. I'm talking hard evidence that most people have no idea even exists. And I'll warn you ahead of time, you might not be ready for where this goes, but we're going there anyway. So if you want to join me in this rabbit hole, be sure to subscribe to Cabin in the Woods. And if you have any tips on leads I should check out as I research this project, be sure to get in touch with me. All right, back to my conversation with Dave Paulides.
There was a man in the movie, he was a former Navajo Ranger. Essentially, he is the game warden, one of the many game wardens for the Navajo tribe. And he was told, you're going to go research this Bigfoot and UFO topic. We have too many complaints about it. And he goes, I don't want it. He goes, no, that's your job. So he becomes the Navajo X-Files. And during his research, he comes across these tracks that start in the middle of nowhere and end in the middle of nowhere on trackable ground with no reason for them to stop in the middle of nowhere. He talks to more people. He finds out, well, this is a regular occurrence. Regular occurrence? A regular occurrence that Dave has experienced. I was hiking with a friend in Colorado in an area with activity. It had snowed 6 inches. We're walking down this trail, a virgin trail, snow's virgin, perfect. Suddenly, out over to our left off this slight hillside, here come these tracks in a straight line, about a 5-foot stride, cross the trail in front of us, stop 3 feet on the other side of the trail. I mean, there's the beginning. Here's the end. How did he do that?
There wasn't any tree cover or anything around where, perhaps a large jump could have gotten him clear of the area. Nothing like that around?
Nothing. Nothing. And when you look at the track, looks like a human track, barefoot human track. In a book I wrote called Tribal Bigfoot, there's a story in there that comes out of the Mormon newsletter. And it talks about one of their settlers coming across the plains. And a Bigfoot, they described it exactly like a Bigfoot, comes up next to him at head level while he's on the horse and mind speaks to him. This is in a Mormon newsletter. But the mind speak is one of those things that people, again, don't want to acknowledge. But probably thousands of people have experienced it. So I think we have to start thinking outside the box. Rather than thinking as a human has a heart, liver, kidneys, a brain. Once the heart stops working, we're not here. I've had too many people explain to me that Bigfoot has this ability to mimic anything imaginable. Ron Moorhead said at one point in his camp in the Sierras with his partners that they heard their camp being torn apart, broken glass, tables breaking, wood breaking, all of this stuff occurring. And they thought that they were going to come out at the end and everything was destroyed. They came out, nothing was touched. Another time, they heard a car door open and close. As someone who spent 8 days at the Sierra camp, I can attest to it's at least 8 or 9 miles from the closest road. There's no car door you're going to hear opening and close. Native Americans have said that they can imitate anything in the world. Okay, obviously, nothing we know of can do this.
What do you figure is the origin story, the evolutionary chain, so to speak, of how these beings came about and their divergence from us? Do you have any kind of all-encompassing theories that as to their origin?
See, I think based on the DNA, there was no evolutionary relationship with Bigfoot. But once I did the movie, there was probably 3 hours of extra footage that we couldn't fit in. We've talked about making a second one with the extra footage. There's so much. But it kind of gets me irritated. I mean, I made other movies. I know we have this problem all the time. So what I did was I wrote a book that comes out simultaneously with the movie. Same exact title as the movie. And what's in that book is everything we couldn't fit in the film. That adds more to the story. One of those stories. In the 1960s, Rod Serling had a show. Kind of like Unsolved Mysteries. Mystery stuff, unusual stuff. And he had the grandson on of a rancher from Northern California in the late 1800s, early 1900s. This rancher kept a journal, dated it, unusual things that happened to him. He was running cattle up near the Oregon-California border, and he kept them up there in this temperate climate during the winter. And they lived with the Native Americans in that area during that time. Man said that at one point, a Native American is walking by him with this plate of fresh meat. And he asked, "Where are you going?" And he says, "Can't say," and he walks away. Well, this rancher was good friends with the elders. So he walked over to an elder and said, "Hey, what's going on? What's all the secrecy?" He goes, "Oh, it's okay." A couple of days later, he sees the same thing going up towards these cliffs. Finally, the elder says, you want to see? Yeah. Okay. We got somebody that lives up there. Won't hurt you. Doesn't look quite like us. Has hair all over its body. Takes him up there. They feed him this meat. Very passive, polite. Bigfoot. They come back down. The rancher's stunned. Where'd it come from? The native says that a couple times a year, this flaming moon comes down from the sky, settles on the meadow right here, and 2, sometimes 3 of the crazy bears come out of the craft. He didn't say craft, come out of the moon and jump down on the land. And then they're our friends, and they run up to the cliffs and we feed them. And then after they get out, people that are inside the moon come out, they wave goodbye, they get back in and leave. The wording in there is perfect. If you think back to that time, they didn't know what a spacecraft was. They didn't know anything. So he described it as a moon. Comes down, lands on the meadow, they get out. Again, I found that story. I could not believe it.
If you had to pick one or say two at the most of the weirdest or most shocking, unexpected details of a Sasquatch-related investigation or account that you've looked into, what would that be?
Probably being in the middle of nowhere, and I'm a fisherman. I like to fish, and I'll hike in 5 miles to a good fishing spot by myself. I don't care. And when I'm fishing, I'm fishing. I'm not thinking of much else other than that. And I catch and release everything, usually fly fishing. Coming out of a spot one time, and probably 15 feet from where I was fishing, just up the trail, pick up another trail. Right at that bend, there's a track right there in the middle of the trail. Right where I would be looking, unmistakable, one track. Nothing else anywhere, no sound, no smell, no nothing. It was not there when I came in, but it was there when I came out. So as an example, I put my foot down next to that track, and I couldn't indent in the ground at all in the dry part that it indented into. And that's pretty consistent on these reports. It's as though the biped that did that had to have weighed 1,000, 1,200, 1,400 pounds, because my 200 pounds couldn't even penetrate it. How's that possible? Something else happened here.
Folks, for you who are watching, again, this film, by the time you watch this video, it will be available on Amazon. It's called American Sasquatch, Man, Myth, or Monster, and it's well worth watching because, again, it boldly walks into aspects of the Sasquatch phenomenon that most people, most films, most explorations of the topic in general are afraid to walk into, are afraid to face and address. And Dave and the people that he has gathered together and interviewed in this film address all of those head on with boldness, which is an approach I can really respect. So beyond that, Dave, did you want to say anything about the film or anything else you care to share?
For the last couple of hours, you've heard me pontificate my opinion and my outlook, and I want people to know that that's not what this movie is. I've laid out some of the best researchers you could find, and I would ask you to go there with an open mind, listen to what they have to say, and then if that still interested you, go to our website, missing411.com, and get Blu-rays, DVDs there. You can also get my book, which piggybacks off the movie by the same title, and kind of rounds out everything for you in a neat package.
So, the million-dollar question: where does all this leave us as far as solid answers to the Sasquatch mystery? Honestly, I don't know. But one thing's for sure, we're dealing with much more than a simple, unclassified animal. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, share it with your family and friends, and subscribe to Cabin in the Woods. Those things help the algorithm know that you appreciate my content, and it, in turn, pushes my videos out to more people, and that helps me afford to be able to keep making them for you. And if you want to support the channel even more, I've got a Patreon page, which I'll link in the description. It's the best place to connect with me personally and more deeply than is possible here on YouTube. And more importantly, it's the best place to see my exclusive and deepest Sasquatch research. There are several tiers of membership. The first tier is free, and you get more exclusive perks and exclusive content the higher tier you sign up for. I've got things on there like early looks at my recent Sasquatch expedition in the mountains of British Columbia, full-length uncut interviews with some of the top Sasquatch researchers in this space, as well as an ongoing stream of my own thoughts and research, some of which I really can't share here on YouTube. So if you're a true Cabin in the Woods fan, check out my Patreon page. I promise you it'll be well worth it. Thank you all again so much for watching this video, and I'll see all of you in the next one.